Hello and welcome to the Horticulturalists. I'm Stephen Ryan.
And I'm Matthew Lucas.
And we post a garden video every week. So why not subscribe and press the alert button so that you can keep up with what we're up to.
Yes, and you might have a burning question for Stephen Ryan, horticulturalist extraordinaire, in which case put it in the comments below and he will answer it in 60 seconds every Monday.
And don't forget to tell me where you're from so that I have context.
Indeed.
And today we're, funnily enough, on my driveway at the nursery again. Weirdly.
Now,
Yes.
we made a 12-month cyclical operatic epic here on your driveway because there's so much going on. And we've looked at many plants and shrubs along here because it's a tight space that has to do a lot. And we've mentioned this particular thing in the past, but today we're going to deep dive.
Well, in fact, we're going to bring it to the fore and make it the star of our opera, in fact.
It could be a diva. And what is it, Stephen Ryan?
All right, well, the plant we're going to talk about today is a very small genus of plants known as Edgeworthia. They're a small group related to Daphne, quite close to related to Daphne. And in fact, they're often commonly called yellow Japanese paper Daphne for many reasons.
Well,
we'll go into them.
Well, we should find out just why, and it's right behind us. So let's just spin the camera around and take a look at your Edgeworthia.
What a good idea.
All right, Stephen, here we are amongst the Edgeworthia, and there is the most, how would you describe it?
It's not a sweet scent. It's a sort of a musky sort of perfume.
It's stunning, and I'm trying to imagine how to describe it for you.
Yeah, yes, because we don't have smell-o-vision, unfortunately.
I think it's quite light and floral. That sounds stupid, but well, you know something.
It's sort of almost obvious, yes.
But, oh, no, I can't. It's just, I can't.
Oh, well.
Anyway.
You'll just have to imagine it for yourselves.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I can imagine why you said it's related to Daphne. I mean, it looks a little like Daphne.
Oh, yes, its floral sort of shapes and forms tend to allude to Daphne and its relationship thereof.
I would say, though, that, you know, a lot of winter flowering things are fragrant. This isn't overpowering. You can't even smell it walking past.
No, you've got to really put your nose into it.
Unlike Daphne. Anyway, enough of that then.
All right.
So, where is it from?
All right, well, it's a very small genus of about 5 species.
Yep.
They all come from Asia, mainly from China. It's an interesting genus in that it's only ever really got tenuously into Australia, and we only have 2 species that seem to have found their way in.
Yeah.
Edgeworthia chrysantha, which was known as Edgeworthia papyrifera, which means of paper.
Yes. Hence the paper bar.
Yeah, and chrysanthemum, of course, means yellow flowered. So both names are reasonably appropriate. And there's another larger growing species called Gardneri with a paler yellow flower, which you do see occasionally here, but it's rather a big and gawky shrub. So it's probably not as useful as chrysantha as a garden plant. Now, it's named after a chap by the name, funnily enough, of Edgeworth.
Goodness me.
And he was a botanist and he worked for the East India Company and he passed away in 1881. So that gives you a sense of where he was from. And here in this country we have 3 forms of Edgeworthia chrysantha. This one is the variety called Grandiflora, hence big flowered. The normal form is much smaller.
And just looking at those flower heads, there are enormous number of buds in each head.
Yeah, and the flower will go on for ages because of that, because they open successively through the flower head. I like the fact that the flowers are yellow, but if you look at the back of the flower, it's got sort of almost a white fur on the back of it. And there is a form out there that has been sold in Australia and is occasionally come across called Red Dragon, which is, well, it's a bit of an overstatement. It's really orange.
Orange dragon doesn't have the same ring.
No, it doesn't have the same ring. So it's a deep orange, and of course the white and the back of the flower stays there. So in fact, it's quite interesting as a flower combination.
So obviously this is deciduous.
Yep.
Does it do anything in autumn?
Not really. The leaves tend to just go mushy and drop off. They might go slightly lemony, but otherwise there's no real autumnal thing about it. So it's all about its winter effect. I think most of the rest of the year you'd walk past it, it's a bush. You wouldn't pay much attention to it. But at this time of the year, when it comes into bloom in any of its forms, it suddenly makes quite a feature in the garden.
And again, along the driveway, which we've alluded to many times, it is really striking. And it's also next to a bamboo that's not variegated but looks like it is.
Yeah.
And the two next to each other are absolutely stunning.
Yeah, well, the white of the back of the flower on this picks up the white in the bamboo, and of course the yellow is a nice little bright splash of colour at this time of the year. And so I think Edgeworthia is well worth planting.
Now we should just mention the name of the bamboo is, because we're cropping in the footage.
Sassa veitchii.
That's it, and
Yeah.
we've covered that on many a video.
Yeah.
All right, so back to Edgeworthia. Now, did you say where they're from? They're Asian?
Yeah, they're basically Chinese.
Chinese.
Although the common name of Japanese yellow paper daphne is tacked onto this particular species, it actually wasn't originally from Japan. The Japanese actually imported it to Japan to use the very, very fibrous, almost bootlace-like bark to manufacture high-quality paper.
Right.
And I have heard, it could be wrong, but I have heard that in fact at one stage they were printing the yen on the bark or on the paper made from the bark of this particular plant.
Okay.
And I'm going to take it to that next level and say, see, money does grow on trees.
Oh, Steve, that's
Sorry.
a bad joke. Firstly, it's not a tree.
Yeah.
Secondly, this can't produce a huge amount of bark.
They grow a lot of it.
Okay,
Yeah.
you'd need a lot,
Yeah.
just saying.
And I might add, it is one of those things that you need to be aware of because the bark is so fibrous. Please do not pluck flower stems off the plant, because if you do, the chances are that you will rip the bark all the way down the stem and cause it all sorts of damage.
Is that the scar we can see?
Yeah,
over
that's
here?
a scar that we've got on the plant over there where somebody has thought it was appropriate to help themselves to some flowers off my Edgeworthia. So be aware. Sharp secateurs if you want to pick it. I mean, it makes a good cut flower, but just make sure you cut it with secateurs so you don't rip the bark.
Now, we've looked at this before. I've never seen yours quite so covered in bloom. So does it come from a much colder climate?
No, not
Has this
particularly.
responded? Why do you think this is flowering better this year?
I think it's just one of those things. I think that, you know, some years it'll flower better than others, immaterial where you're growing it. Like a lot of things, they have their good years and their bad years. And sometimes you can't really pin down for why.
But getting back then into its ideal conditions, so I'm presuming it's hardy. So where can it grow? You know, we've got lots of viewers all over the world.
Well, I've seen it in gardens in England, I've seen it in North America. It won't go down to incredibly low temperatures, but it will cope with quite heavy frosts. It's probably more likely to suffer from summer heat in our environment, and mine's facing into the south, which in the southern hemisphere is into the shadier part or the cooler part. And like a normal Daphne, it's more about protecting the roots. So if you can plant this where you keep its roots cool, either naturally because it's got a wall or a fence behind it, or you mulch it really well, or you settle it in amongst some large boulders so that that keeps its roots cool, then if you can keep the roots cool, well drained but never dry, and the soil generally is better if it's on the acid side, but I believe Edgeworthia will in fact grow in either acid or alkaline soils, so it has quite a range of potential in all sorts of different places and climates.
Okay. I can observe a somewhat lolloping habit. Is this its typical habit? It's sort of growing along and then up, or is this just because of the position you planted it?
It's about the position and also a couple of interesting things that happened to this plant in its early life. Normally, in
Did
fact...
someone fall on it? What was that?
Oh,
plant?
yes, my Mahonia that I imported from overseas, and a lady fell on top of it, and it was the only one in the country, and she managed to fall on that. But anyhow, that's how life goes sometimes. This did have an accident at one stage, and it lost its centre, and so it's grown out sideways more than normal. So normally Edgeworthia actually will come up, and then it'll get one set of growth, and then when it starts to get the next set of growth, it will branch into three, and then it normally branches into three again. You can sort of see the three sort of branching arrangement on some of these branches here. It's not locked in, but it happens regularly. So you end up normally with a sort of a broadly dome-shaped bush with space under it is in fact how it normally grows, but mine's become the semi-procumbent form.
And what happened to it?
It just got damaged by something that fell into it. I don't even remember what happened now, but it did get smashed down at some point or another.
Well, talking of time then, I'm guessing this is a slow grower. How old is this plant?
This plant was probably put in about 12 years ago.
Oh, so not too slow.
No, and it grew away quite quickly initially, and I think it is one of those plants that will get itself established quite fast, and then it will slow right down and just over the years just get fractionally bigger.
Beautiful. And actually, as we're sitting here,
Yeah, you can pick it
the
up.
fragrance is,
It is, it's lovely.
yeah, oh, it does remind me of something, and I just cannot think what it is. All right, now, you've got...
Yes, I've got a couple of plants of them here behind us.
All right, so here's some other plants. Let's talk propagation.
All right.
Let's talk propagation first.
All right. Well, they're propagated normally commercially from soft to semi-hardwood cuttings in the late spring, early summer.
Yeah.
And they'd be done under a mist spray system with probably a little bit of bottom heat. They're not probably the easiest thing to propagate from the perspective of the home gardener. So you'll probably end up having to go out and buy one. And I guess this is the very point, or the very time when I should mention some of the issues with young plants as well.
Yeah.
They are absolutely adored by slugs and snails.
Oh.
And when it's a small plant with only a few growing tips in it, you can in fact
Like
quite
this.
easily lose a plant completely, and generally overnight if the slugs and snails move in to eat the growth buds out of the plant. So be aware of that. And the other thing that these plants regularly do, and we've got one on this young plant here, is they fasciate. It's quite common with Edgeworthia to get this strange mutated growth pattern on
I
them.
didn't want to bring it up.
Yeah, no, it's
Let's get a bit
actually a
closer.
thing. So that's a fasciation on it, and fasciations pop up in all sorts of plants. I've seen delphiniums that were fasciated. I've seen all sorts of things that do it, but some plants are more prone to it than others. If you object to it or don't like it, just cut it off. But it doesn't do any long-term harm to the plant, and it's not one of those things necessarily that's going to keep coming because you left it there. So it doesn't really matter, but it's something to know about.
There you go. So propagation, and I'm presuming then to anything that's trickier to propagate is going to be reflected in the price.
Well, it will. Yes, it will be reflected in the price and in the availability of some of these plants.
Now, what's this one here? Why
All right,
is
well, this is the wild species, and as you can see when you compare it to the one behind me, the main difference between chrysantha, the wild species, and Grandiflora is that the flower clusters are much smaller. They do tend to nod more, so they're not actually quite as obvious, and the stems are much thinner and wispier and willowier.
Yeah.
And this is probably the one that would have been planted for its bark, because it
Right.
would be easier to peel the bark off something
And
like
actually,
this.
the bark is very attractive on this.
Yeah, it's quite pleasant. I have to say this is a very weirdly formed plant. I think it spent some time in its pot lying on its side at some point or another. So again, I'm not showing off my wares terribly well here, but
No,
what can I say?
there you go.
So
It's-
that's chrysantha in its wild form.
There you go. So yours is on one of the narrower knolls as
Yeah.
the driveway narrows, and it's quite bare.
Yes.
But you were saying there's some good things that you could have, or you could plant with
Yeah.
it.
All right, well, there's a couple of things to keep in mind when you're planting things with Edgeworthia. It doesn't have a particularly vigorous root system, so
Yeah.
it will quite happily cohabitate with lots of other plants.
There's a very chirpy bird.
Yes, there's a little honey eater or something sitting up above us giving us a hard time. We're probably too near its nest or something. Now, there's two ways you could companion plant with this. You could plant something around or under it that did its thing at a different time of the year when this is not looking all that interesting.
Yeah.
So you could go down that path. But I actually think the best thing you could do is to plant things that flower with Edgeworthia and either of a similar colour or a contrasting colour so that you can get more bang for your buck, so to speak, out of the one spot in your garden. So a few ideas. Obviously it's yellow and it's winter flowering, so you could go down the path of planting things like primrose,
Yeah.
so Primula vulgaris. You could plant some of the smaller growing narcissus, the little daffodils, would be lovely around it. And so that would be yellow on yellow, so you just intensify the yellow effect.
Which would be beautiful.
Or what about something like really dark burgundy black hellebores?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, we've made a hellebore epic, and I did confess my lack of enthusiasm for hellebores. I must say, though, after that video, I've turned.
Yeah, you-
And he gave me one, which is actually in bloom right now.
Yeah, well, there you go.
So
So
it's deep midwinter.
yes. So you could use hellebores or any other early flowering perennial. Oh, and I missed galanthus. Things like snowdrops would be great with this because they'd pick up the white in the back of the Edgeworthia's flower.
And if you wanted to do something in summer when it's really not doing anything,
Well, the trick in summer is going to be, because it's going to be in foliage, you're going to have quite dark shade underneath it, and just how much you'll be able to see down towards ground level will be dependent on how the plant has been grown in the first place. But if I was looking for something to plant around it that was sort of later flowering, there's oodles of woodland perennially things that you could use under it. So you could use things like astilbes, and of course the colour doesn't really matter then because this isn't going to be in flower. So it could be any colour you want. So you could go pink, or you could go yellow, or you could go red. And so it's just a matter of finding interesting plants. You could use eucharas. They would be quite nice under it, and their foliage in the winter might be a nice contrast, particularly some of the newer coloured leafed eucharas, because some of them come in sort of chocolates and things like that, which would be a really nice effect. And then the flowers later in the season would be attractive.
Well, there you go. I think we've covered Edgeworthia from
I
top to bottom.
I think we have, and I hope that it gives this shrub a little bit more of a profile, which I believe it deserves.
Although, one last question.
Yeah.
Would this, I think I've seen this growing in the Melbourne Botanic Garden, so it can take a bit more heat.
Oh yes, it would, as long as you plant it in a spot where it's not getting the
And it's getting the cool root run.
and cool root run, yes. So there's no reason why you couldn't grow an Edgeworthia in a Melbourne suburban garden, as long as you've got the drainage and you keep the roots cool.
There you go. Well, it is the fragrance is gorgeous, and in bleak midwinter, it is such a joyous thing to behold.
It is one of my favourite winter flowering shrubs.
Well, there you go. Now, if you want to know what we're doing next week, you'll have to hit subscribe.
And don't forget, if you've got a question you'd like to ask me, why not put it in the comments below, tell me where you're from, and we'll answer it in our Monday shorts.
Well, he will. I'll just read it out. But until then, we look forward to seeing you next week.
All right, bye all.